Hello, everyone. My name is Jennifer Reynolds, and I'm the CEO of Women Corporate Director Foundation. Welcome to our Boardroom Beyond podcast. We're going to have a really interesting discussion today about workplace culture, about how innovation is impacting our workforce, about what ethical workplaces look like. And today with us, we have Jin Montesano, who is the Executive Officer, Executive Vice President, and Chief People Officer at LIXIL Corporation. She is also a director at Yamaha Corporation and a member of the WCD Japan chapter. So we're thrilled to have her here today to jump into this really complicated topic of what is the next gen workforce expecting from us. So perhaps, Jin, we'll start off by turning it over to you and just have you say a few words about your background.
Thanks, Jennifer. Thanks for having me today. It's really exciting to be on your podcast. I feel very honored to be invited. So I am an American, having lived and worked abroad for almost 25 years at this point, 10 years in Japan with this publicly listed company called LIXIL. I am the Chief People Officer. I'm also the Representative Executive Officer, which in Japan sort of has a kind of elevated title where you really are you have fiduciary duty for the entire enterprise. And other than the CEO, I'm the only other representative executive officer. It's quite a unique position to have because it really allows me to think and act from a very enterprise perspective in everything I do, and not just from an HR perspective. My portfolio at LIXIL does also include the impact strategy, which is our sustainability strategy, and the communications and government relations teams. So while my portfolio is very broad, I think, it fits really nicely into our topic today about the global workforce, the workplace, and culture. And I'm looking forward to having this discussion with you.
That's great. Well, thank you again, Jen, for joining us. I thought we'd kick things off just to talk generally about what are some of the trends, issues you're seeing in the workplace, and perhaps as well, you can provide perspectives from a global perspective too, as you have operations in different parts of the world.
So I definitely look at the world from a global perspective, but also from the perspective of serving a Japanese Tokyo Stock Exchange listed corporation. We're in 150 markets worldwide, and I have 65,000 employees. That's LIXIL. And then, of course, Yamaha is a $17 billion corporation. Oh, I should say right up front that I sit on the board of Yamaha Motor Company, which is actually a different publicly listed company from Yamaha Corporation, which is music. And so, musical instruments and so forth. And I sit on the board of the Yamaha Motor Company that makes outboard motor engines and motorcycles and so forth. And, when I think about both of these companies, as well as, many, many global companies that are facing this incredible an operating environment where we're facing with technology and not just AI, but just generally the pace at which technology is changing our world, a hugely disruptive moment for all industries and sectors that most of us play in as organizations. And if you think about that, plus the introduction of technology, I think there's a kind of perfect storm forming around how we need to think about leading people and how we need to think about the workforce and managing the workforce to really become still a competitive advantage and a unique asset for corporations to maximize as they're working towards achieving their goals and driving innovation and so forth. I don't think it's ever been as complicated or as challenging to be in the C-suite as it is today, given that we seem to have far more questions than answers in terms of how to really tackle some of these complex issues. And so it's a really interesting and challenging time, I think.
Yeah, I actually, you put it quite well that we have more questions than answers. And I think that does summarize what I'm hearing in the market today. And so I think that's why we have so many discussions around this topic is we're trying to figure it out. And clearly, part of the issue that we're all grappling with is just post-COVID. How do we re-engage our workforce? I mean, some of these trends had already started before COVID, but I think COVID really accelerated some of these trends of work-life balance and different demands from different generations, I think. And, even from the perspective of gender, that increased flexibility that working from home could give. And, how do you then go back to that 100% in person? So I wanted to get your perspectives on that, but and then also recognizing that I sit in North America, and here we have had a great trend of work from home, but that's not the case in every country too. So wanted to get your perspectives there as well.
Right. Yeah, you're absolutely right about COVID having accelerated a lot of what had already begun with regard to workforce and workforce trends. In Japan, um, as everyone pretty much understands, Japan is really at the advanced state of a declining and aging population. Just to give you a sense of where things stand, over a third of Japan's population, roughly 36 million people, are over the age of 65, and 1 in 10 are over the age of 80. And yet Japan also has some of the longest, living generations. And so you've got a lot more people still living and staying in the workforce. It's the first time we're seeing 4 generations working in the same workplace. And, that's never happened before. So you've got this really interesting complexity where you've got Gen Z, Gen X, and millennials, the boomers, and all working in the same operating environment and really having very different perspectives about work and what it means to be retained and engaged in an organization. So that's really been challenging. And in Japan, we also have something called lifetime employment or a seniority-based system of employment, which is very different from pay for performance. And what seniority-based employment means is that you have, for large corporations, this promise that you join at 21 and you'll retire at 65. And the sort of exiting people out of organizations isn't as easy to do in Japan. You're really protected. And so it really means thinking about what we're doing with people and how we're actually continuing to skill them and make them relevant, not only to the corporation, but also enjoying meaningful work. And so the way we think about some of these generational changes and how we create good working atmosphere that creates efficiency and productivity is really quite unique in Japan than I think we would say overseas. And yet at the same time, I'm a global company and I have to think about sort of the overall workforce and how we continue to attract, retain, and keep engagement high. And so for us, it's really come down to really, creating a situation where we've removed as many barriers at work as possible. And I can talk more about that, but it's really about policies, but also culture. And then the second thing is really around skilling and reskilling, upskilling, and really understanding what your sunset skills are and what your sunrise skills are. And how do we actually start to inventory that as a corporation and start to understand where the priorities around skilling needs to be? I think the third piece that I would say that's really important in this picture is creating an inclusive workplace. And I know we talk a lot about DE&I and what companies are doing in this space, but for me, it really, really underscores this multi-generational workforce, underscores how critical it is that we get inclusion and inclusive culture and leaders and managers exercising inclusive behaviors right. Because without that, there's all sorts of train wrecks and accidents and bad feelings and teams not operating as efficiently as they could. So I would just sort of put it out there as really these 3 kind of critical things that we need to get right as we think about this multiple generation workforce we're living with.
Yeah, it's a new skill set in management. And I think that you raise an excellent point in that, often we just expect people to be able to manage in this new environment, but they need to be trained to be able to manage in this new environment because they create the culture at the end of the day. It's wonderful if you're sitting in the executive suite, and you have a vision, but it needs to get executed. And so lots of places it can go wrong as it filters down through the chain. So it's an excellent point. I wanted to move next to AI. Of course, we're all talking about this. How is it impacting our workforce? How are you, perhaps in your organization or at Yamaha, starting to experiment, try some of these technologies? How are your employees feeling about it? Obviously, there's some feeling of threat sometimes when we talk about our jobs being taken over by AI, by robots, these sorts of things. So, I wanted to jump into that topic and see what your thoughts are there.
Well, interestingly enough, so I have 65,000 employees at LIXIL, but 30,000 or 32,000 are actually in Japan. And what's really unique about Japan is just very generally speaking, with, at the risk of sounding like a stereotype, Japanese are actually very comfortable with robots and technology. So the sense that this is going to be a threat, we don't have that necessarily in Japan as we might have, say, in other cultures or geographies around the world. And in fact, Japanese see robots and technology and automation as a way to sort of respond to or resolve some of these issues around declining population and aging population and the challenges that we face. We have a labor shortage crisis in Japan. We're going to have 11 million shortage of workers by 2040. And a very interesting fact, 313 companies last year declared bankruptcy by stating that labor shortage was the #1 reason they had to go bankrupt. I mean, it's not a huge number, but we're starting to see this trend in things like bankruptcy in Japan. So, with regard to just thinking about, how do we actually navigate AI, in our organization, we've really made it possible for everyone to get involved and actually try it out. So we've run these massive waves of hundreds of participants from executive to leadership to middle level management. We've given them access to the LIXIL AI. So we do have our own generative AI world that was built by our team of engineers. And obviously it's built on the back of ChatGPT-4. And we allow for employees to kind of come in and try it. And we've kind of created this really structural approach to experiment and learn. And experiment and learn is one of LIXIL's 3 behaviors. So it's official permission to try it out and see how it can actually help solve problems in your division or your department, and also to improve productivity. And really stage 1 of this has been about productivity, if you think about it. We're really not at the point yet. Well, maybe some of the big tech and very cutting edge companies, but for my current company, we're still really leveraging the productivity gains that we can get from AI and skilling. And I think with regard to the newer generations, the early career talents, skilling and development is a non-negotiable for them. And every study kind of points to that. So being able to give them the opportunity to come in and actually work in teams or on a specific project to create hypotheses and try to work through them using AI, that's been really energizing. And we know that that's actually helping with retention. So I don't think we have yet the answers, but we've got these pockets of activity that we're doing to try and see how well employees want to receive it, and really try and leverage AI as a form of upskilling and reskilling what they're currently doing. So that's what we're doing now. And I think from an HR standpoint, though, I just want to say that, you know, we don't know how quickly AI will, in fact, replace us as humans, right, in the workforce. But one could argue that we're going to have humans for a little bit longer. And even if we might have more of us doing less of the certain, routine work or even some of the high end work, because, you're reading about all of this stuff. I think it's really important for HR teams and HR organizations. Certainly, we're doing a lot of soul searching ourselves, is for as long as there are humans in the workplace, the AI technology, generative AI, is really requiring us to think more deeply about what it means to be human at work. And the combination of, almost like remote first working and the lack of human connection has really deteriorated our relationships with colleagues and coworkers. And with now ChatGPT and how quickly technology is sort of moving, I think it's even more important that we double down on basic human skills, like how do we collaborate? How do we actually give feedback? How do we influence toward an outcome or have a positive tension around a project and exchange views about that without it going out of control or becoming, not useful to the outcomes that we're driving for. And so I think a huge amount of the work that we're trying to do in my team is not only embrace the AI and the technology, but also to sit and think about, well, how do we strengthen the human ties? Because human relations become that much more critical. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that that's true is that human element of how do our jobs evolve, what
Yeah,
skills do we need, become quite different. And I think we need to put some thought into that. And I think as opposed to it all being, I'm going to lose out, what am
right.
I going to gain and add here as a person, as an organization as well.
That's right.
So I wanted to go back a little bit to something we started on earlier, good corporate culture and, setting the tone at the top, at the boardroom level. We as board members often are asked about culture and we should evaluate culture and know, is the culture good? Is it bad? And it's hard as a board member, right? You have surveys that you do. There's
Yeah.
different questions you can ask management. So I wanted to jump into that because I know some of our corporate directors are certainly thinking about this. How can they really have the pulse on that piece? So what are you doing? What are you seeing happen around that? Knowing that here's our strategy, here's what we want in the corporate boardroom and senior management. How do you drive that down in the organization and make people accountable for that?
Yeah, I mean I think that's the billion-dollar question, because culture is so, so important to everything. I mean, if you agree that, culture is defined as the way we work around here when nobody's watching, like when there's no bosses, right? How do you scale that in this complex world where our work is super fragmented and we're not even in nodes of offices anymore? We're just in our living rooms or in our work offices and workstations all around the world. And so really getting culture right in terms of from a management perspective, like what is the ideal culture in which you would like to see competitive advantage, to see innovation happening within your organization? And then how do you actually make sure that that's being followed through and embedded all the way down to the capillaries of your organization? I think that's one of the most important strategic initiatives or focus areas that any CEO and C-suite need to really own. And, luckily for us, because we came together through a whole bunch of mergers, half a dozen companies, we had to ask this question. We were forced to sort of say, well, what kind of culture do we want to live in? And I've been very fortunate since joining the company in 2014 to focus on that and really kind of paring back, simplifying, and really getting at the heart of the culture that we want to embrace and then enhance within the organization because we were kind of this melting pot of many different cultures. And what I found is that the board can play a powerful role by holding management to account, defining the culture. What is the ideal culture for this organization? And I think that is something that if you're from a company that's been successful organically and just grew from a small company to a medium and then large, you might not have checked in on that question. And I think you need to and have been able to articulate it. For us, it's all around our corporate purpose and our behaviors, for example, and sort of the behaviors expressed and that we require you to show up using that sort of forms I would say the bones of our culture. And so I think that's number one. And then number two, the board needs to ask how the management is tracking KPIs against whether we're getting any closer to realizing that culture. And, climate surveys are important, but what of those questions in the climate survey, for example? And I know that because I sit on the LIXIL board as an inside director, I bring those survey analyses and survey results, and I talk through these points with great intention every quarter. And at Yamaha, as an outside director, I'm often asking about this and for management to articulate it. And I think that's really important because that's the most direct way that the board will ensure that that culture is kind of pulling through. And if there are problems, you all are using a common language because you've already agreed on what the common KPIs are for really tracking and monitoring these culture signals and culture shifts that are going on in that company. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think having that regular dialogue, and it allows you as a board member to sort of know when something feels off, right?
Right.
That's something different than I heard last time, or, to see, is there consistency here when I'm getting the story about culture here? And that leads to my
Exactly.
next question, I guess, about, because often as board members, there's a tension between how much should we be involved in workforce planning. I mean, how
Mm,
far down do we get in the weeds there? And how much do we obviously just look to someone like yourself get that report back. So what's your view on the board's role in that workforce planning, whether that's from a skill perspective, whether that's to your point around where shortages might exist, how much
Yeah.
do they get involved on those types of issues?
Yeah, I personally think that the board's all about value creation, right? Like they're actually supposed to ensure that management has the right strategy and plans in place to execute in the creation of value for shareholders in the long term. And so first they have to check if the people strategy actually enables that corporate strategy that's going to result in the value creation. And if the corporate strategy requires the people strategy to really revamp or take a different approach with workforce planning, just because the organization is really trying to go hard left and it requires a really different way to think about workforce planning, or it's more evolutionary. I think that's the level at which the board should care about workforce planning. But going really into the details, it's probably, you know, it's probably not as useful unless there's actually really strong expertise on the board. I think it's much more important that the board members feel comfortable that the workforce planning that's going on does plug directly into the overall people strategy, and that they're convinced that the overall people strategy is actually going to enable the corporate strategy. So to me, I think that connection, and if that circular connection is there and they feel comfortable about it, I'm not sure board members need to go any deeper than that. But of course, they should reserve the right to ask those detailed questions to verify. That would be my approach.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a balance to your point when there's times there's a big shift happening, you might spend more time on
Yeah,
some of those questions than you might in other periods. But
yeah.
yeah, it's a good point.
That said, though, it's tough, right, Jennifer? I mean, right now, what keeps me awake at night is really thinking about the reskilling bit,
Yeah.
because skills are changing so fast. And it's really hard. It's really hard to pin down the businesses around what are really the critical skills that we need. I don't even mean today, but like in 5 years, right? So
Hmm.
that I can actually properly plan for what kind of workforce we're going to need and what kind of skills we're going to be needing in the meantime. And yes, AI can do so much, but that's really still a limited sort of set of skills. There's a lot of other skills that we're going to need, and especially to kind of close the gap. So this, to me, the skilling topic is the big one that I'm really wrestling with, and trying to get more input from the businesses on. And while the board hasn't asked me a lot about it, I do think it's something that boards need to start leaning in on a little bit. Not specifically around what are you doing, but what do you think are really the critical skills going forward, and getting a sense of management having a competent discussion and dialogue internally about this area. So skilling is really kind of high on my kind of list right now.
It's a critical, critical area. There's no doubt
Yeah,
about it. I mean, I think it sort of points to the fact that we're all, as professionals, going to have to be able to reskill. So those people who can do that and jump in are going to probably be your most valuable employees, because as things change 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, what do you
exactly.
need as an organization? It
Exactly.
really is fascinating.
It is.
Jin, thank you so much for joining us here today and sharing your perspectives. It's been so interesting, this topic, as we started off with. We have so many questions, not enough answers yet, but we're all trying to figure it out. And so it's been really helpful to understand how you're approaching it. I did want to mention before you go to our viewers that LIXIL Corporation actually won one of our Visionary Awards last year. So congratulations again. We were so proud to be able to honor your company. You've done some great work there. We will be honoring 4 other companies on September 30th of this year in Orlando, Florida. At our Visionary Awards, we'll also have our Global Institute over 2 days, September 30th and October 1st. So we're looking forward to that. Encourage our listeners to have a look on the website and join us at the event. So thanks again. Have a
Thank
wonderful day.